Alrighty, we will get started. So first and foremost, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Craig Thompson. I'm the Channel Marketing Manager at Wavelink. And thank you for attending the first of our Info Byte series for Fortinet resellers and part one of our Info Byte on Teleworker seminars with Fortinet. These bite-sized sessions are designed to give our community of a deeper understanding of the products we showcase and the key solutions we think businesses need moving forward as we steer ourselves to the new normal. Today's session will be hosted by our incredible Fortinet pre-sales lead and resident Fortinet guru, Jaden Zullo. We'll be discussing the requirement for businesses to secure their data while staff are working remotely for the foreseeable future and how Fortinet's VPN solution is a perfect aid to this. This is a session where we strongly encourage engagement. So please ask any questions you have in the chat box throughout the event, and Jaden will answer them in a facilitated Q&A at the end of the presentation. While we do encourage engagement via the chat box, we ask that you do mute yourself if you have not already done so and turn off your video as well. We will also be recording today's session and we'll share a link after the event for you to circulate with your teams. We also encourage you to provide any feedback that you have on the session via a feedback form that will be included in the same email. For more information on our other events coming up, including part 2 of this seminar later this week, I welcome you to visit our website via the link I have placed in the chat box. Jaden, over to you and have a great event, everyone.
Thank you so much, Craig. So just to reiterate as well, any questions you've got, I'm really actually very happy to answer them. But we will do that at the end. So just so you don't forget your question, type it in the chat box and then Craig will facilitate it at the end. So conscious of time, let's get started. Now, this is going to be a mixed session where we will show you some live interaction with an actual FortiGate performing a VPN using the Forti client as well. So as some of you know, sometimes in live demos, things get a bit glitchy, but hopefully everything should go smoothly. Now, let's get started on the information around VPN. And again, if you already know this information, that's fine. Not everyone does. So we'll just quickly go over the fact that a VPN is what they call a virtual private network. And what it's designed to do is to give you a tamper-proof, encrypted, and authenticated method to send information from a computer outside of your corporate network and allow it to come in. So the security methodologies they use now is SSL and TLS encryption. And that actually is the type of code that's layered over the information, and it's used at a level of, say, secure online banking. And it's higher up that stack, which means that there is more bytes or more bits, more bandwidth, more information put within the encryption, which means now, especially with TLS standard 1.3, there's been a push towards an upgrade of sort of firewalls or routers to do the de-encryption. So now with Fortinet, they have the F series you may have heard of. One of the biggest pushes around F series is to make sure that they have more compute power to be able to decode that new higher level of encryption. So in a virtual private network, this diagram will show you that you've got headquarters, which has its data center or different types of equipment within it. And you have things like the branch office needing to connect to that central HQ, workers using hotspot, workers traveling maybe at a hotel, on their internet, the laptop at the hotel, or maybe the workers are just on the road and they're using 3G or 4G. Then you've got workers, especially now, who are at home and they need to connect back to central headquarters. Then you've also got hackers as well. That's right, hackers will always look for different ways in, and a VPN is a way in to get through to central HQ. So let's look at the Australian government and what they speak about around VPN. So they essentially say that virtual private network connections can be an effective means of providing remote access to a network. However, VPN connections can be abused by the adversary to gain access to a network without relying on malware to convert the communication channels. So that's a really, really key point, is that whilst it's beneficial, it is also basically leaving what I like to call an exposed tunnel or basically a bridge tunnel to get in to your network. So if we look at what the recommendations are from the Australian Signals Directorate, they essentially say that VPN termination points should have a DMZ. So you shouldn't connect directly into your corporate network. You should have an area or a VLAN, or in this case, a device is what we're going to talk about, a FortiGate, where all the connections will land. And once it lands on that termination point, it can be investigated and a rule can be applied, and then the traffic can be passed on. Another thing that the Signals Directorate says is that multi-factor authentication or device whitelisting or operating system minimums restrictions should be put for anyone trying to log in. Should also do enforcing a host check. So that is, anyone connecting should have antivirus, or in one of the sort of the better recommendations that they put through, which seems so simple, but a lot of people just don't do it, which is geolocation of the IP address. So if you're trying to connect from a foreign country and you're not expecting a foreign country to connect to your corporate network, well, an easy thing to do is just say only accept Australian IP addresses. And it's a simple bit of code, and we will show that later. And that's a lot of people can just turn that on and really actually reduce the number of attempted hacks they have through remote VPNs. And then obviously, as always, with any security, have effective logging and log analysis so that you can basically see any type of activity that looks suspicious and investigate. Or alternatively, if something's happened, and sometimes things do happen, you have a log there to be able to investigate so that you can try to prevent it later. We will also cover off very quickly here split tunneling, and that's mainly because with Corona as it's hit, a lot of people are working from home or people are working on their 4G, and there are some discussions that are coming up that we're seeing from end users where they're like, look, we don't want to go with our overage, or people are complaining about their internet being slow because they're connecting to a VPN. So in certain situations, the Australian Signals Directorate says don't do split tunneling at all. But in certain situations, especially like now, split tunneling is actually something that you need, because if you have staff with a bad VPN experience, they're just not going to turn the VPN on, and they're going to try to access work stuff through perhaps unsecure methods, as in just through the regular web, or maybe they're just going to do it on their phone, where, you know, having it on your phone, again, malware on phone and antivirus on phone is not that popular. So we tend to encourage people to do a little bit more complex things on the computer where you can do host checks and antivirus. So we'll do split tunneling at the end there, but again, split tunneling, not always recommended, but in especially today's time, it's something that we need to look at. So what's the current landscape? How are people currently going into their corporate network? Well, you probably recognize at least two of these logos here, which is RDC as well as TeamViewer. And then you've also got ports as well. So I'll just go through these, and essentially TeamViewer is probably the most popular one, where you use an ID and a password, and you can connect to a remote controlled PC. So you see this normally on people's domain, but then what they do is they have it installed by the IT department. The customer might be shown, yep, you can now use that to connect into this server whenever you want, wherever you want. But what people don't know is that hackers regularly look for a way to exploit TeamViewer, and that's because it is just so popular. And one of the major ones that happened recently is that if you use the admin code, your admin username and password, to do the installation of TeamViewer, it was actually storing itself within TeamViewer itself, and there was a way to exploit and actually show your administrator's username and password in clear text. So if you didn't upgrade and patch your TeamViewer, that vulnerability was still there. And even now, when we use TeamViewer internally for our repairs of different people's computers, we don't use them on our servers, we use them from personnel to personnel. The amount of updates that, you know, the little arrow that comes up, and people just don't click it on TeamViewer. They just don't think, because they don't have it open all the time. So there are a lot of TeamViewer installs out there that are sitting there with that really, really bad exploit about exposing the admin and password in clear text. The next one is obviously remote desktop connection, which is built into the Windows platform especially, where people can put in the IP address of the server they're trying to connect to, or potentially the terminal server remote desktop they're trying to connect to. And then once they put in their username and password, they can log in, and then they're essentially working on that network. One of the issues there is that if you don't have the right tools set up to see when someone's trying to do a brute force attack, then people can, hackers will be able to see that you've got remote desktop on your computer, that you're using it in a terminal server. Therefore, they'll brute force get onto one of the actual remote desktop sessions, and then from there, they'll do a survey. So a hacker will go, okay, this is the type of environment it is. It's an old Windows 7 environment. they're using a remote desktop, but maybe an old Windows server. I can use a couple of exploits and deploy a particular type of vulnerability exploit all the way through here. And then by doing that, they've got their server. They need to make a really quick and swift attack, because a fast attack is always the most effective. And the last one we've got is open ports. So one of the things that I've seen in my experience quite often, unfortunately, is that you need to use phone systems and you need to use video conferencing, and the easiest way to get them to talk to one another and the most cost-effective way to do it is to essentially open up ports. Now, some older phone systems, especially ones that come from that traditional PBX, where you would have everything separated, separate lines in, separate hardware, separate infrastructure. They would open ports to basically get inter-branch communication going. It was an easy way to do remote administration for a phone installation company. So you'd have open ports. And then worse off, they'd have open ports on that IT system. And then they would basically leak the default admin credentials as well, or use a single type of admin login for all their customers. So it is, unfortunately, more common than you think that IT infrastructure sitting on people's network has an open administration remote port with the default credentials. So hackers can exploit that as well, where they basically test one of the open ports, use the default credentials, and then they're on a legacy IT equipment that's on your network. So that's the current landscape. As you can see, all of them have some pretty big tunnels, gaping tunnels in them to get past the security. So let's look at what we can do as resellers to talk to our clients about their current landscape. And remembering before I mentioned about the move to TLS 1.3 also meaning some existing firewalls may not have the compute power to decode current levels of encryption as well. These are all talking points, especially these three logos and these three types that you can say about, let's look at a different solution. So what's the solution? Solution's Fortinet. That's always the answer, everyone. So Fortinet is a recognized leader in security, as you can see here on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, time in a row that they've been in that top right hand, which is leaders and visionary. So for the NSS Labs in 2019, you can see there on the right hand side, NSS Labs recommends for many different types of areas of IT infrastructure, including next-gen firewall, next-gen IPS, data center security gateway, breach prevention, breach detection, advanced endpoint, web application firewall, and SD-WAN. So if we look, Cisco was recommended twice, but Checkpoint recommended 3 times, Palo Alto recommended 4 times, and drumroll, Fortinet recommended 9 times. So for 2019, an outstanding result, and that's because Fortinet really is driving towards wanting to do that single point of security, because by consolidating your security into a single vendor, you have a single pane of glass, you have the ability to have automation and orchestration as all the different parts of your security talk together and share their intelligence to give you a more effective security. So as you know, and alluding to just then, that the traditional access layer approach of complex, so having individual boxes for switching, web filtering, IPS, antivirus, what that's meant is that multiple point solutions means potentially multiple points of failure or inconsistent policy, or essentially if you ban on one VLAN and then it passes it to another, and then on that particular VLAN, perhaps the rules are slightly more lax or maybe they're a bit harder. So there's also a user experience, which is not necessarily consistent, and that user who's getting frustrated or the IT team is being inundated with complaints about performance or complaints about access, what that'll mean for them is that they can't concentrate on where under the radar there's actually a security breach in play. And there's just so much noise around the IT policies or the way the IT equipment's working that they may miss sort of that under the radar flying, potentially a hacker or an exploit that's happening. So if you consolidate into a single security vendor, such as Fortinet, and especially with the FortiGate as the heart of your security solution, then you get one UI for all of your IT team to learn. There's a single platform to manage and to patch and to get across. And then there's also one place for policies. And if you have your policies there, in a single place, then you can actually see, well, am I a bit too aggressive here and a bit too lean here? Or how do I basically have it more aggressive in this particular area past the DMZ? Or in this instance, VPN, how do I make it like split tunneling so that people get a good user experience on the VPN? And of course, if the more Fortinet you sell, you can work with your Fortinet rep to speak to them about deal registration. And then by deal regging, you can basically lower the overall capex for your customer by passing on some great pricing as well. So just remember that you've got, different types of products, and of all the FortiGate products, you've usually got the option of a hardware appliance, a virtual machine, and you can actually normally get things like the FortiGate directly integrated into your cloud provider, such as Azure and AWS. So with your hardware appliance, you get dedicated processor chips from Fortinet that are patented, that are designed especially around that TLS 1.3 decryption. You get a virtual machine. It means that you can do elastic computing, and you can basically grow as your demand grows. And that'll help in terms of controlling costs for your customer and getting the FortiGate solution in earlier, because if they've got already a virtual machine environment set up, you can propose to them a FortiGate license. At least then it puts it there on the network, and then later on they could move to a hardware one if they want more compute or something that's more dedicated. But if someone wants to go completely cloud and the conversation around hardware on site, it just basically gets shut down, then goes straight to that conversation around auto-scaling functionality with the FortiGate cloud formation template, as well as deploying the native scripts with Azure and AWS, which will basically mean there's an interaction between the core infrastructure of Azure and AWS and their interface and your actual FortiGate from a security layer, which is a really strong story. And we can cover that off in a different info byte, which is around Fortinet and its sort of offerings in that Azure and AWS marketplace. So people often say, well, what are the models? What price are we talking at here? How do I introduce it? Well, this is a really simple chart just to show you that if you've got a number of remote workers, which I'm sure your customers are talking to you about now, this is the models that you need to sort of group and bracket them by. And that's an indication of the cost with a 1-year subscription with the ATP. So that's the bare minimum subscription. But just a reminder for VPN, which is what this topic's about, VPN comes on base license. So if you don't have ATP, you will still be able to use VPN, which is important to know. And it's also, when you're talking to your clients, you can say to them, okay, well, what happens when your subscription expires? Will I lose my 100 VPN tunnels on my FortiGate 30E? The answer is no. You'll still be able to use those VPN tunnels while you, as I like to say, renegotiate your subscription for the next year or next 3 years or next 5 years. So we've also got here as part of the FortiGate VPN solution, it's always going to come up, which is FortiClient. So with FortiClient, you've got FortiClient VPN. So FortiClient VPN is essentially the free software version you can install. You grab that from forticlient.com, you just run the install, and then you can basically put in what the external IP address will be, the username and the password, and including the multi-factor, and you'll be able to connect to the FortiGate. So a lot of clients, a lot of resellers ask us all the time, they say, okay, do I need to get these FortiClient licenses? The answer is no, you don't. But if you look to the middle of that chart, you'll see that the difference with a lot of the questions that come up after people start using FortiClient VPN, which is free, is they say, I want to be able to log on as soon as Windows starts up. So I want an auto login or an auto startup. And then they also want the auto reconnect feature. So if the connection goes down, they want the FortiClient to attempt to reconnect. And then also as well, when they're off net, is there an ability to do some sort of web filtering, some sort of antivirus? And you can't do any of that stuff with VPN, FortiClient VPN free. Obviously, and also calling TAC. If you're using the FortiClient VPN free software client and there's a problem with the install, or you've got some questions around it, you will not be able to call Fortinet TAC. They won't take any questions around that. Also now from May 2020, if you want to use FortiClient, some people here may have already had some experience with it and know that you need to install the management software for it, which means you need to find somewhere on the network that has the ability to host and be able to receive the remote requests for updated rules and policies, and that's called Endpoint Management Server, or EMS. Now, as of May 2020, Fortinet will host that for you with the FortiClient Cloud, and that's the new SKU there, and that's a rough indication of the cost for a 1-year subscription with a breakdown of the per device cost per month as well. Because a lot of the other antivirus companies will talk about per device per month. So that's a good way to sort of pitch it as well, as opposed to saying it's $1,000. So it's $3.50 per device per month, completely hosted. It's cloud-based, cloud management-based. Your basically endpoints will have their antivirus, plus you'll get all the benefits of an always-up VPN as well. So if we look at the secure access layer, this is what we're speaking about before about in terms of a single pane of glass. These are the products we find are very, very, very popular in that medium size to small business. By collapsing down all the existing vendors into Fortinet, it'll help you, as I said, increase your total contract value, your TCV, because you're putting in more products. And then also you can potentially gain more budget by looking at the costs that people are spending on perhaps their multi-factor provider, their wireless provider, their switching provider, their anti-spam, antivirus, cloud mail provider, or if they have something on site, they're still using a traditional mail server as well. Don't forget, FortiMail can also work as an email server as well. And we've got, of course, the FortiGate there at the heart of it, as always. So based, again, on the Australian Signals Directorate, what they claim to be an improper remote access and proper remote access, you'll see the difference in these two diagrams being that on the improper access, you've got just regular clients there connecting using one of the three methodologies we mentioned before. So TeamViewer, remote desktop, or an open port. They go over the public internet and essentially go directly into the network server infrastructure of headquarters. What that means is that there's no ability there to question the traffic coming in, to do a challenge methodology to that traffic coming in, to look for anything that perhaps is suspicious, to log and have all the logs there, but most importantly, apply a policy. So one of the main things will be, you're coming in, what do you need to access? Okay, you have the authority to access that, well, you can access just the phone system, as opposed to if you don't have a landing point, a VPN termination point, people coming in via TeamViewer, landing on the domain server, well, all of a sudden they're on the domain server, so they can access Active Directory. You might have installed on there one of your abilities to get into hypervisor, and you can see the rest of the file. You can see files that are there on the server as well. So using a FortiGate, using security policies to direct your remote users to exactly what they need to access means that they're not sort of unlocking the front door and getting into the entire vault. Think of it as just getting a key specifically to the small little safe chest within the actual vault itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break up the Death by PowerPoint and then jump into actually showing you what the interface looks like for a FortiGate around VPN. The reason I want to show the team here what it looks like is because when you know what a single pane of glass management looks like, when you understand that you can do quite a lot from the FortiOS interface, it really helps build confidence in the way that you describe it to your clients and saying that you have a lot of options for configuration, and it also is easy from the GUI perspective to have a look at where you're trying to click, as opposed to perhaps some other competitors where you might just get a lot of line code, especially old Cisco ASAs, where a lot more things can be done from the CLI. So a lot of people may interact using the command line interface. That's essentially a black DOS screen where you type in a lot of the items that you need. Okay, so I'm going to jump out, jump into, oh, actually, you know what? I just realized I need to connect over VPN. So let me actually open up my FortiClient VPN. So this is FortiClient VPN. Now this is the free version. Now the reason I'm using the free version is because, again, if you sell a FortiGate, this is the free version and you won't need to purchase FortiClient licenses. I always recommend selling FortiClient with it, but sometimes you've got to take step by step when you're collapsing down people's security into a single vendor. So this is FortiClient free. As you can see, it says upgrade to the full version for additional features. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to our Melbourne HQ. So what we can do as well, I've got two accounts to demo, one with two-factor, one without two-factor. For this one here, I'm just going to use the non-two-factor one. It's always that last 2%. Just hangs and you're like, ah. Okay, so now I'm connected. So now I have created a VPN tunnel into Melbourne, which means that I am on the local network there, and I will be able to access the local FortiGate. So this will be our FortiGate for Melbourne. And as you can see, this is a FortiGate 60E. And on this 60E, we're running version 6.2 for FortiOS. We have some additional items hooked in, like a FortiSwitch. We're also using FortiClient as an antivirus, and we use FortiSandbox here as well. But let's jump into the IPv4 policy, which is here, policy and objects. Here on the IPv4. And now I just want to show you visually what we were speaking about before. So this is when people connect. So this is a branch VPN. So this is Melbourne to Sydney on a branch VPN. And it's essentially saying that our switch box, which is our phone system traffic, is allowed to connect to the Melbourne switch box. So that means we can do inter-branch phone transfers, but the phone system can only talk to the other phone system. So we're actually using the VPN and the VPN termination point to make sure that the phone system is only talking to the receiving other phone system. So when we were speaking about before, a lot of IT systems just have open ports, and hackers know that if they get onto the phone system, they can use that potentially to hop via the open port to the other office, to the headquarters. You can use VPN here with an IPv4 policy to be able to control that traffic. So you're essentially segmenting it. And that, again, coming back to what I said before about when you walk into the server or you walk into the infrastructure, only getting access to what you're supposed to have access to. Okay. Now we can go to second demonstration here. Oh, it's done that thing where it resets it. That's okay. I know the way around it. Do the old drag. So what I'll do is I'll show you here the multi-factor login. And I'll also show you how you can do some restrictions around the device operating system for user logins as well. So what I'll do whilst we're already logged in on the VPN, is I will show you the multi-factor once I disconnect from the VPN. But what we've got here is you've got some rules around the user login. So you can do for users and devices here, user definitions, user groups, as well as guest management as well, okay? You've also got your device inventory. If you wanted to essentially here, you can see the different types of devices and you can add them to whitelists and blacklists. And then with every FortiGate, you get 2 FortiGate multi-factor authentication tokens with your normal FortiGate, okay? So these 2 are designed to be given to your administrators. So multi-factor authentication, having that on the admin account, I'd say it's a must. I said it's no ifs, no buts. You should put multi-factor authentication on the actual FortiGate's admin account. For when you want people to connect over VPN and putting that multi-factor layer over it, what you want to consider there as well is telling them that, yes, there is a price for FortiToken, and you can buy the licenses in stacks of, and I didn't actually put the pricing on there, but we can provide the pricing for you afterwards, but it's essentially FortiTokens. You can put your FortiTokens here and then assign them to your users. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you what it looks like for a user who wants to connect on VPN and when they actually want to use the FortiToken mobile app as well. Give me 1 second, I'm just going to disconnect on VPN. Connect. And I'm going to reconnect now on the VPN. So as you can see here, I'm going to now move to a user account that has multi-factor turned on. This is the admin account. Put my password in. See, it's come up with a token request. So with the token request, I open up the FortiToken mobile app, and you guys have all probably seen what the Authenticator apps look like. You've got a timer counting down, exactly like this screen here. And I can take the actual number code that's there and do my two-factor authentication sign. Always that 90%, 98%. There we go. So multi-factor. All right. Now enforcing a host check for antivirus and geolocation. So just as I was saying before, what we can do is on here we can go to, sorry, just flip that over to the other screen. So under VPN settings, we've got the VPN portal for remote users here. Here under host check, we want to make sure that people connecting, so if they're connecting from their home machines or they're connecting from maybe their BYOD device, so they bring your own device, we can do a host check to make sure it's got antivirus, firewall, or both. Or perhaps we want to restrict to an operating system and say, you know what, anyone who's running Windows 7, no. Or anyone running Windows 8, no, you can't connect. You must be on Windows 10. All right, that's another great little niche setting you can do there around host checking. And then in the VPN settings here, this is what I was talking about before, about allow access from any host or limit access to specific hosts, only people in Australia. So a Wavelink at the moment doesn't have any reason for people from overseas to be connecting to our corporate infrastructure. So we've basically blacklisted all IP addresses as a blanket rule there. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. So what I might do is, this is obviously effective logging and log analysis. And if we look here, one of the main things that we'll be able to see if we go down to log and report, everyone's seen log and reports. I don't think I need to go into too much detail on log and reports, but here on a FortiGate, we've got a specific section to really immediately see your logins. As you can see, this is my login now. This is my host that I'm on. These are the other people who are currently connected on the VPN. And then I can right click and I can terminate the session if I want straight from there. It's a simple right click, end the session. So if something looks suspicious there, or perhaps someone's connected their computer and not disconnected it, and you want to go in at the end of the day and say, you know what, I want to kick everyone off now, I can just quickly go in and then end the session. Okay, so the final thing we'll do here is just around split tunnel, just because split tunnel is popular, and obviously we mentioned before about remote workers and needing to split. So again, we've actually got one of the questions I did quickly see there, and that's essentially that the question there says, can you elaborate on why not to use split tunneling? The Australian Signals Directorate, which is where I get a lot of the cyber guidance because it's the way that the government sort of says, they essentially say with split tunneling, the best way to visualize it is that split tunneling will only put specific requests through your VPN tunnel, but it's always open. So think of it as though you've got a sewage pipe almost, all right? So you've got a sewage pipe and there's a little bit that peels off into your fresh drinking water. So what would you rather do? Would you rather hope that if the pressure's fine and you've got the right pressure, that none of that waste overflows into your drinking water? Or would you rather just completely block it off so that you're only getting two different types of pipes? So if you leave split tunneling, that means it's always open. And if a hacker is on your home machine and it sees you've got a VPN open, but all the traffic is not going through to the corporate, so you might be connecting on, you've got split tunneling set up, you start browsing, then the hacker gets on, you've got the VPN that's open there. So you've got, it's almost like leaving the door slightly ajar is probably the best way to describe it. That's the way they indicated on the Australian Signals Directorate. And that's why it's not recommended. They sort of say, look, it's an all or nothing when you do VPN. But as we said before, and I think a lot of resellers here will agree, especially the techs, you can't just have an all or nothing if your corporate headquarters is in America, because then all of a sudden you're trying to look up where your reseller is and it's serving you results from, say, Atlanta in the US, because your VPN is hauling back to the data center in corporate head office, which is overseas. Or for me, what's really frustrating is now that I have the VPN on and then I look for somewhere to have lunch, it starts telling me areas around the Wavelink office that are going to be good places to have lunch because I'm VPNing. So my location says now I am down at where the FortiGate is down in Melbourne, okay? So that's why I sort of was tiptoeing around with that split tunneling. But just for everyone's knowledge, what you can do, I showed you before about how you can split different traffic, but the way that you do it is essentially in your VPN, under your portal section here, you've got your remote users. This is how easy it is to set it up. You go, I want tunnel mode, I want split tunneling, and when someone's using their home computer, I want only this particular traffic split off through the VPN. Everything else can be local. Okay, so that's what the settings look like. Very easy to do. Don't have to do any complex sort of coding or anything like that. You literally just use these radar buttons and add. Okay, so we've only got about 10 minutes left. So what I want to do is address the questions that are there so that we can get everything answered. And then we can also unmute and have any other voice questions, but it might just be easy with the number of attendees that we've got. People just type it into the chat box if we can. Okay.
Thank you for that, Jaden. It's probably, within the number of attendees we have in the room, it's probably better just to put all the questions you have in the chat box. So we've addressed Stephen's question. There's one here from, a couple of questions from Russell. Can you show us some tips on VPN connection fault finding or common issues?
Yes. So with VPN, okay. One of the probably most common ones where people complain about, and I will say with the FortiClient VPN, one of the things that does happen a lot with that is that people are putting in the wrong password. Now, as weird as that sounds, that's probably the most common one that I have to deal with, and especially with FortiClient, it doesn't tell you you've inputted the wrong password. So how do I go around fault finding that? Well, I come from a Office 365 background. And as weird as this is going to sound, and like I said, because we're pushed for time, I'm going to tell you the most common fault, which is wrong password, and then I'm going to tell you the easiest way to fix it, okay? So what I do to fix that is essentially I have the user go to the actual web browser version of FortiClient and of the portal. So you'll be able to, when you set up your VPN, you get a browser version, which is called the VPN portal, which is essentially putting in the IP address or whatever you've got as the actual gateway with the port number, and it will take you through to the actual login screen for the VPN in a browser. And what you can do there then is you can put the password in, and it'll actually tell you if the password's incorrect or correct, okay? Because sometimes if you haven't set up your user sync correctly with Active Directory, and because now a lot of end users have a lot of different passwords, then that's what I would sort of recommend there. It would definitely be a case of where the incorrect password for VPN and not syncing the passwords correctly. So once you've tested it on the portal, then you know that it's a password issue. You can go into your FortiGate and you can reset the user's password. But one thing you do need to do is make sure that your LDAP server is actually syncing the passwords correctly, because that's probably the most common thing I see, and that's the easiest way to diagnose it. And the way to fix it is to make sure that you've got your password sync on correct, or to clearly tell people, look, you know what, your password for VPN is different. Make sure you know that it's different. Because a lot of people just think it's their domain password, and if it's not set up exactly from there. So I hope that answers that for you, but that's probably going to be that's the most common one, and that's the most common solution to it.
Cool. Thank you for that, Jaden. And another question from Russell: how often is the geo list updated?
Yeah. So that's okay. That's a very specific question that I can get the answer from Fortinet from, but I know that the Fortinet, they speak a lot about. So if you want to know exactly, to the day how often it's updated, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to make something up on here, but what I can tell you is that when you do have your FortiCare support, that means that you get access to the FortiGuard labs, and the FortiGuard labs will have on here the different versions. So as you can see here, this is the application control signatures. This was last updated 12th of the 5th, 2020. So all these different ones here, your botnet IP, your IP addresses. So your geo lists are updated in the Internet Services Database, is most likely where they're linked together. Again, I would need to confirm where it gets that address from out of these package lists here. But normally this Internet Service Database definition is where the geo list would also be updated. And in this instance here, to answer your question specifically, well, this was updated on the 12th of the 5th, 2020, and it's most likely, if we look through the versions, that it's probably updated every couple of days, okay? So I hope that answers the question there for you, but I can get confirmation if the geo list is linked to this particular database. No worries. Thanks, Russell.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jaden. That was all the questions in the chat box. So if no one else has any questions, we'll leave it there. Following the session, we will generate a recording. We'll send out the email with the feedback form, and then based on the feedback as well currently in the session, we'll do our best to endeavour to make the slide deck available to everyone who attended the session as well. If that's all the questions, thank you very much for joining. Jaden, thank you very much for your time and for hosting the session. And we'll hopefully see everyone on Thursday for part 2. Thanks very much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.